Hello, my name is Matthew Winstead, and you're about to watch the documentary that I made for my grandfather in honor of his life. Before the movie begins, I just wanted to share two quick things with you. First, I wanted to express my gratitude for you taking your time to watch this. You see, not only is it a love letter from my grandfather to my family, but also from my family to my grandfather. While making this, I came across a hurdle that I hadn't really anticipated beforehand. How do you sum up a person's entire life in just the matter of a couple hours? How do you decide what to leave in and what to cut out? The answer is you can't. Not really. So what you are about to see is the highlights, the director's cut, the matte version, if you will. Now, for those interested, there is another version, the Grandad cut, the unedited, uncensored, full 5-hour version that is also available. So if you watch this and you think, well, why didn't he talk about this? Or, I'm surprised he didn't mention that. He probably did. It's just in the other version. Lastly, I'd like to ask you to silence your cell phones. You see, much like my grandfather, I'm a storyteller. That's where I get it from. And the best way to enjoy this is to just sit back, relax, and imagine that you're having a one-on-one conversation with him, much like I did, without any interruption. I thank you again for your time, and I hope you enjoy Grandad. The house you're looking at belongs to my grandparents, Mallory and Mary Lou Winstead, or as I like to call them, Grandad and Granny. This house has been part of my entire life, and is in fact one of the few remaining houses etched into my brain from my childhood, as others have relocated over the years. I make it a point to visit Granny and Grandad about every other week, and during my visits, Grandad will tell stories of his past, and I often find myself getting lost in them. It occurred to me that I only really know Grandad, my grandfather, but I don't really know Mallory Winstead, the man. And that has intrigued me over the last couple of years. Grandad and I have spoken off and on about him possibly writing a book on his life. And then the idea came, well, why not make a movie? A documentary? A visual book? So that's what this is. This is a one-on-one conversation between he and I, where he tells me his life story for the first time. You don't really need to hear anything else from me except that I love him, I respect him, and I need him. We all do. This is Granddad's story. All right. So, I know it's hard, but just pretend the camera's not here.
I ain't worried with the camera.
This is just a conversation between you and me.
Okay.
All right. You ready to get into it?
Yep.
So, we're going to start off very easy, very basic, very simple. What is your name?
My name is Mallory Winstead. I do not use my middle name or Junior because I've always detested the name Junior. And also my middle name's not that great, so just call me Mallory or whatever. A little family history on the Winstead side is they came from England to a place in Virginia called Maratica, Virginia, in the 1600s. It was very early in that year, around 1605 or so, they landed in Maratica, Virginia. And at this point today, which is 2023, there is still one descendant of that family living in that same little town, which is a very small town on the water. They were farmers, and they came over, and some of them were farmers, some of them were different crafts. They were into tailoring and other things that I read about. My immediate family, my grandfather, my great-grandfather is buried in Virginia. I know where his grave is located. It's an unmarked grave. He's buried there with one of my aunts who died as a young girl. My grandfather, Leroy Mallory Winstead, along with his immediate family, came to Maryland around 1920. At that point, his wife was Homerzell Winstead. She was a fisher before they got married. My grandfather came here with his second child, which was my dad, Mallory B. Winstead. The oldest girl, named Katrine, stayed in Virginia as she was getting ready to get married at that point. She didn't come to Maryland with them. They moved to Chester for a brief time and then came here, my aunts and my grandmother by train, and my father and his father in a truck that they hauled furniture in to Risley. So they came from Chester, but somehow they had still kept their cows in Virginia. And my father told me that they went to Easton Point and picked up the cows that had been shipped up on a flatboat from Virginia to Easton Point, down around Easton. At that time, the roads were a little different than they are today. There's not the same exact way you go to Easton, but kind of another way. But it was the only road going to Easton at that point. And it took them 2 days to bring that herd of cows from Easton up here on the other side of Risley, which is where they lived. And when they got up here, my father was approximately 12, 13 years old at that point. He went to Risley School. It was called Risley Agricultural School back in those days. And there he met a fellow by the name of Charles Knott, who was a resident of Risley. They became friends. I think Charles was a little younger than my father, but they were very close in age. Charles had a large family, and he also had a younger sister who was unmarried. At some point, my father started dating Charles's sister, Florence Knott, was her name at that point. And they went together, and for a few years, and eventually they got married in around 1927. I was born in 1938. They were married 10 or 11 years before I was born. 2 years later, my sister was born in September of 1940. My older sister and myself were born in Easton. My younger sister was born at Risley at home. She was 7 years younger than myself. When Dad first left and got married, he tried to farm a little farm out on Krause's Mill Road. They had mules and cows and typical farm stuff of that period. And he, again, like his father, couldn't make a go of the farming. There just wasn't any money there. And he wound up working at different places around the area. He worked at a button factory in town. He worked for Mr. C.D. Lynch, who had a feed mill and coal operation, which is, the building's still standing there, but it's no longer used for that purpose. And at some point, he finally got a job with Brar Ice Cream Company. And this had to be back in the 40s, I would assume, because I know he was there just short of his 20 years when he left here. He left Risley they closed the briar plants down in 1961 in January, and he left Ridgely to go to Millerstown, Pennsylvania, to a briar plant that was still in operation for another year. He never got the ring that he wanted, 20-year briar ring, but he did work for them about 20 years. My sister and I, well, in fact, both my sisters and I attended Ridgely School. At that time, it was called Ridgely High School, and they had added on an auditorium to that building where my father went, and they also put a terrace in front of it, so it looked a little different than when he went there. There were several people that I knew going to school, and I went all the way through Ridgely and graduated in 1956.
I remember going to Chincoteague fishing with Chris and Granny and Grandad, and the fish kept coming and coming and coming, and we're like, okay, Chris, we're ready to go, but nope, we didn't go. The fish kept coming. We went home with like 2 big coolers of bluefish, and the sad story of it is nobody likes to eat bluefish. So I believe that Granny and Grandad put the fish in their freezer and it went bad. The freezer went up, the fish was done, and that was that.
A lot of things in life are bad or you don't like, but I didn't really call them sad. But at an early age, I was impressed with one thing that I have to talk about, and I've told this many times to my wife, but as a young man, we had very much to do in Ridgely. It was a small town that had a teenage hangout up on the corner, and that's where all the kids would go at nighttime, socialize up there, and they would be uptown. And I was a big boy. Going through school was always bigger than I should have been, and finally the kids caught up with me, but I was maybe 14, 15, 16, and I'd go uptown, we'd go uptown and hang out up at Steve's place on the corner. And I went up there one night, and right across from Steve's is the town park, and you could still recognize the park by the water fountain that's there for the animals to drink out of. It's always been green in my memory. When I was a kid, they used to have, we used to play hooky from school when they would have the veterans come and fire their rifles and play their bugles and have little things for the veterans, and we'd take off and go watch that. But this particular night I was up there, and it seems to me it had to be in the fall because we were back in school and we were playing soccer. And there were some fellows up there that I knew and had ran around with quite a bit. One of them, they were in a black Ford car. The car was identical to the one that I owned. I had an off-white car, Ford, just like it. They were in this fellow's car. His name was George Walls. They were sitting alongside of the horse trough by the park. And there were 3 people, as I remember, in that car. And of course, it was Buddy Walls' car, as we called him. And Jack Glover, who was a year older than myself, was there with him. And the third person was Donnie Redden, a young man that was a couple years older than I was. He graduated out of school and gone on to work around locally. And when he was in school, he was a very nice-looking young man, and he was sort of the teenage heartthrob of the 50s. He was James Dean to the girls. They all wanted to date him, and all the boys looked up to him. But the 3 of them were sitting there, and they were debating what they were going to do that evening, and they asked me to come on and go with them. And I said, I can't go, I've got to go home and do something, homework or whatever. And they kept begging, come on, go, come on, we're just going to go here or there. So I told them no, and I didn't really know where they were going. Maybe I did, but anyway, the next day we had a soccer game down to Fedelsburg. And we came home, and I got off the bus, And as I'm getting off the bus, I see Jimmy Glover's car come by. Jack was the boy that was uptown with the three, one of the three. Jimmy was his older brother, and he had a 46 Ford Coupe. It was a neat looking little car back in those days. And Jack drove onto the schoolyard and made his way across the people to me. And he said, have you heard what happened? And I said, no. And he said, we went to Shantytown last night, or we went to Hitching Rail last night and had some beer. And he said, the time's changing. We're getting ready to set the clocks up or back or whatever. It was in the fall, so it was fall back. They were going to set them back an hour. So if it was 10 o'clock there, they're going to set them back to 9 o'clock. So they were over around Denton on that road at Hitching Rail, the three of them, and they knew that if they went to a place called Shantytown, which is located right next to the elementary school, Chapel District on the Eastern Road now, was the old Cordova School. But before you get there on the right-hand side, and that's what it was. It was a shanty, but they had beer and whatever. And I had been there with Donnie on occasion, hooking school, which I wasn't too proud of then, but that was a big deal back then. So anyway, they were coming down Lewistown Road, which is the road that connects the Denton Eastern Road to come through and wind up on this side. And they went around the bend and flipped the car. The car had a high roof on it, and they were easy to flip over. I've been in two cars, or actually I've been in one car that did flip over, the same model, same year as that one. But that car flipped over, and they carried Donnie to the hospital. And I never really got the story straight, but by the time Jack came to tell me about Donnie was dead, he had died. He came in town that night that they left in his brand new 53 Ford convertible, red with a black top. Parked it on the corner at Steve's hangout. And when I went to school the next morning, the car was still sitting there, and I thought, how odd that car hadn't gone home. But it didn't really mean, it wasn't that big a deal. But later on the day, I was down in Mr. Mitchell's room, and you could look out the window. It was a ground level, and I seen the car go by heading toward the Redden residence, and I thought, well, he's gone home. So you can imagine how shocked I was to find out that he didn't go. He went home, but not that home. He died, and because of that accident. And the one time that I guess the Lord was telling me I wasn't supposed to go with him, because I could have been right next to him if I'd have gone. But he was a nice friend. He was a good friend, and we traveled a lot of roads together. And it was very sad to me back then, and it still is. I often think of him.
I think one that he and I both like I'll go with one that I really liked was, I was really into, I can't remember if it was a Gettysburg movie or what it was, but when Gods and Generals first came out, like, it was a big thing. I wanted to get that movie and watch that movie. I know you wanted to watch it too. So I had written up a contract for us where we both signed it, and he ended up signing it. We signed it that we were going to share it or watch it together or whatever, and I remember, going back and forth on that movie. But a lot of times the camping trips, the other one was finding that big armchair, that big leather armchair. He was down there. I think he was always tickled about finding the chair for $10, taking it back to the camper. That was pretty funny, but that was a good memory.
Originally, going to school, I had a first grade teacher named Miss Madge A. Thomas, one of the nicest women that I have ever encountered. Everybody that knew her loved her. Back in those days, we started school in 1944. When we went to school, we were there all day. When we left to come home, she would go and stand at the door to her classroom. And as each student left that classroom, she kissed each one of us goodnight every day for 2 years while we were in her class. And like I said, she's never been beat in my estimation as a teacher or a person. Just a wonderful person. Later we went to Mrs. Bernice Lawless's class for 3rd and 4th grade. She had a pet called Steve Wood, who was one of my friends who was related to him. That didn't go too well with a lot of members of my class. We had about 25 people when we started school. We were one of the largest classes to go to that school, which is kind of funny when you look at today's schools, and even back then when you compare that to what my wife had at her school. But for Ridgely, that was a large class, 25 people. Next we had Irma G. Nichols, 5th and 6th grade. Miss Irma was one of a kind. She had the pitch pipe, she would lead you in singing, and she would also correct you in a minute, and she had her favorite places to make you stand in the corner. She had one young lad that had to go underneath her desk and sit there for hours at a time to be punished, and various other things. And I remember standing in the corner one time, even though I insisted to her that I did not do it, I stood in the corner because she put me there. And on her graduation ceremony, we had a little get together in the auditorium where they read all about what had happened in school when the young girl that was in my class was still there and graduated with me, went all the way through school, admitted that she was the one that had done the prank, and I got to stand in the corner. So I guess I got vindicated finally after 12 years. My favorite subject in school was agriculture and shop and athletics. And it's kind of funny because all three of those subjects had the same teacher. His name was Dean Mitchell. I guess we never finished with the teachers, but the first few that I named we had for 2 years apiece, and then after that it was like you had a homeroom teacher and you rotated around to several places. While this was going on, I became at last 16 years old. I had worked delivering newspapers to local people, and I had worked around town cutting grass, saving money up to buy my first automobile. I cut grass, I went out and lifted hay and got hay up for different farmers, and still saving money, and finally bought a car, 1947 Ford. The motor had blown in it, so got it hauled home and sit in the yard for a year, waiting for me to make more money so we could get a new motor. My uncle, Charles Knott, the man whom my father first met, and my mother's brother, put the motor in the car for me outside in the backyard under a tree. He told me what to do and what to tighten up and how to do this and help me. And by the end of the day, we had the old car running again. While I was in school, I amassed 3 more cars. I had 4 when I graduated. Total of 4 I had bought. I only had 1 at a time, but I bought. I went from that Ford to a Chevrolet and then to a Mercury, which was a lemon. Took it back shortly after I got it and wound up with a 50 Chevrolet. Was a 4-door car, was a big car, and that's what I had when I left to go into the service. Graduation at home was in June of '56. Before graduation, they had all the men come from the various military branches of school and talk to you about joining the military. I was the only person in my class that listened to the person, talked to him later, and wound up going to Easton and signing up to go into the Army. His name was William Adlon. His office was across from the post office at Easton Road. And I had to get my parents to sign because I was only 17 years old at the time. I graduated, and 1 week to the day I was on the train leaving Baltimore going to South Carolina for basic training. Tank Hill, South Carolina, Fort Jackson, 3rd Army. 2 months of that, and I wondered after about a week what in the world was I thinking that I had joined the Army. because I wasn't ready for it. I don't know how he felt about me, but it was a far cry from what I ever had gone through in my life. It was different.
What made you think that you wanted to do that initially? Like,
I had no idea because I had no plans for the future, and I just felt like it would give me something to do.
I remember my earliest memory with Dad was we were in a car, and I vividly remember I had a bag of peanuts, and he took us on a ride, and we went to a field that had cows in it. And he got out of the car, and he walked up to the fence, and he started mooing to the cows. And believe it or not, the cows actually came up to him. And I do remember I got so excited I was going like this with the peanuts, and they went everywhere in the car. And then I have a fond memory of one evening he and I went horseback riding out to see his friend Frank Sherwood. And we had some hot cocoa, and then we rode back home. And then when I was in high school, I joined the band front on the drill team. And being in the Army, he taught me a lot of moves with the rifle that came in handy. And when I moved in with he and Mom not long ago, some of my favorite times were when Mom would take a nap and he and I would watch a Western movie, or when she would go to bed at night, we would find another one to watch.
Well, I guess I had to back up again because while I was working in the grocery store, I worked for K&B Market the last couple of years before I did graduate. And there was a fellow there who finally came when the store opened. They were short on help and they didn't have any butcher, and they were, "What do you think this is worth?" My dad come up to buy a chunk of meat, and they said, "Well, what do you think it's worth?" And whatever, they would sell it. And finally this young man come along named William Conley, and he was a town local boy. Grew up originally, I knew him most of my life, and he was the butcher who went to work for K&B Market. I was a delivery boy carrying groceries all over town. Mr. Kirsch, K&B, Mr. Kirsch was the part owner. He was kind enough on rainy days to let me use his very old car, which is still in good shape, but he was very nice in letting me carry orders out in that. Bill was dating a young lady named Faye Conley and Faye Gibson, who lived in Queen Anne at the time. And he kept telling me about this girl that lived there, her sister. He said, "I don't know why you don't call her or go down there." And he said, "I bet you'd like to see her." And I just kind of slept it off because I really wasn't too much interested in girls at that point. And finally one day, I remember her coming up to visit to the store. She drove her aunt's Packard up there without a license. She never had a license, but she drove all over Kingdom Come. And she came up, and she must have come back another time because I was in Mr. Kirsch's car, and she rode with me while I was delivering orders. And we went down to the outskirts of Richardson, and had the dog yapping, and I said, "I hope that dog doesn't bite me when I get out." Well, you know the end of the story. I got out, he bit, she laughed, and that was that. So much for that. And so I met her, and I don't think we might have had a date. I don't really remember. I'm not too. I know I went to Centerville to a sock hop, which was a big thing back in those days. Had to take your socks off on the gym floor and everybody danced to recorded music, I guess it was. Well, I never did learn to dance, but I went, and somehow I got my body all the way across the floor where she was, and got her to dance with me. And at least I do remember that one date. And but that was pretty much it. And then went, like I said, went to the Army, went through basic, came back home, And lo and behold, I wound up seeing this girl again. And this was 1956 also, in August. And while we were home, we dated, and I asked her to marry me. And got her a ring. We were engaged. Wow. I left and went back to a place called Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri. Wasn't much of an improvement over Fort Jackson, except this was a little easier. I signed up for radar and TV repair because there was a local person in Ridgewood that's all I loved, named Frank Kessler, and he was good with most young people. And he had a radio business, and I talked to him a lot about it, and he thought it'd be a good field to try. So I put in for radio and TV repair. And I got sent to carpentry school, but this is the United States Army, and you have to realize that they put you where they want you. And once they get your name on the paper, they really could give a hoot what you think, because you're going to do what they tell you, and that's just the way it is. So I'd already learned that in the first 8 weeks, but now we're down to Fort Jackson, and I accumulated 6 or 8 buddies down there. It was a big thing because we had $10,000 worth of insurance on our body. We used to walk down the road at nighttime after going to the movies and say, "Hit me, I'm insured." Well, that's how dumb we all were back in them days. You can't expect too much out of a 17, 18-year-old kid, I guess. By that time, I had turned 18. I was really growing up fast. And so we learned how to build a building. It was very educational. I never learned too much because I've never been much of a carpenter since later, but we built a building and we put in another second go round there, and then we got the good news we were going to Hawaii. Well, who would think it? So we got on the train in Missouri and we traveled for 2 days around the top of the mountains from Missouri to California, and you could see the front of the train, you could see the back of the train, and I must have been in the middle because I could see them both. And I remember we were on it for a day and part of the night, and I got up the next morning, asked this black conductor, I said, "Well, where are we today?" He said, "Son, you're still in Texas. We've been there a whole day, and you're going to be there a little while longer, but we'll get you there." So we finally got to California. Got on the boat. We were going to ship out and go to Hawaii. The Navy was in charge. Oh my, your troubles just begin if you're in the Army and you got the Navy in charge. So it was very educational. You got on this troop ship. You had a cot to lay on. It was made out of canvas with rope strung to a frame. You had about 12 or 14 inches, and the next guy was on top of you and another guy on top of that. I think they were stacked in there about 4 or 5 deep, one going up. So you just had enough room to get in there and be very careful when you turned over, or you'd be bumping him in the back of his back. But we found out we had to scrub the deck on the way over, and they taught us how to do that. You get the mop, you get the bucket, and you scrub. Well, yeah, we can learn that. So then to clean the mops, it was really nice. You get to go to the back end of the boat and tie a rope around the mop and throw it overboard and let it trail in the ocean, and that would clean the mop. Great. We had mops from California to Hawaii when we got there. They could probably follow our trail because we looped the rope around one time and chunked the mop and never saw it again. We used a lot of mops going over there. And then they come up on the same trip, but we're going to have guard duty on the boat. Oh, well, we're going to guard in case something happens, and we have civilians here, and we have to look out for them. And so we had guard duty. That was another education. Then I learned how a boat functions in the water. It not only goes up and down, it goes from side to side and side to side. If you've never been on a big ship, it's very educational. Because when it goes down so far, you think you're almost going to go into the water, and then they'll come back up. And then you ask somebody, "Well, how fast are we going?" "Oh, we're going 20 knots. Or what's a knot?" "Oh, well, it's something like a mile, I guess." So we were probably going 20 miles an hour all the way to Hawaii. Probably took us a week to get there. But we got there. do we go? To a reception station. And then they divide us up, and I went with all the guys I'd made friends with. There was 5 or 6 of us all went together, which was nice. And then they divide us up and they sent us to various outfits. And my first outfit was the Wolfhounds, the 27th Infantry. And I got there and they put me in a headquarters company. And I was assigned with radio people, and I was just shocked that I was doing this after being through basic and in carpentry school. Now I'm in commo. But it was fun, and I made some friends there and was probably there 6 months. And once again, the Army had plans, and they shifted me off to the 21st Infantry. Gimlets was the name. So what do you do over there? Well, you go and you get a rifle and you train every day. You do PT, you listen to classes, and you train with your rifle, and you do this and you do that, and that was about it. So after a while, when you're in the service for a year, you begin to think there's got to be an easier job that I can do. I'm not really real happy with carrying this rifle every day and doing what we do. So I talked to one of the fellows there. He was the mail clerk of that outfit, and he said, I'm getting ready to get out. Would you like to give this a try? Would you want to be the mail clerk for the company? And I said, I'll try it. And I was thinking, yeah, anything's better than lugging this 9-pound rifle. So I became the mail clerk for that company, 21st Infantry. And every day I would still have to get the rifle and go out and do PT and listen to classes, but I got to come back in at noon. And I'd go get the mail in the afternoon, sort it out. I had my own little office, very convenient. It was under the stairwell going upstairs, so you can imagine how big it was. I had a desk in there and a pigeonhole for letters and a door that I could lock when I wasn't there. So, and then when the troops would come in at around 5 o'clock, we'd have mail call. And while I was picking up the mail and eating lunch, lots of days I would either have it before lunch or after lunch, there was a fellow there in the mess hall, and he was a black guy, but he treated me pretty nice, and we got to know one another fairly well. So I started letting him have his mail. When I get it, I'd take it into him and give it to him. And he really thought that was great. So he started to give me a little extra food to eat, things that I liked, and I got cooked for a little better than some of the other guys. And nobody knew that, but I really appreciated it because it was nice. I went in one day and here was this whole tray of meat, and it was something I had never seen before. And I said, what is that? He said, that's cow tongue. Haven't you ever seen that before? I said, nope, and I don't want to eat none either. But his name was Elisha T. Bennett. He was a Spec 5, and he was a great guy.
So there was one time where we were on the boat and we had picked up Granny and Grandad from like the dock in Denton. Like we were already on the boat and we picked them up. And we had hit this big old wave or something, and I was stood up. I was a little kid and I fell and I hit my nose and I broke my nose, and my granddad, he was there and he was able to, he was the one who kind of was dealing with it, I guess, at first. He was like holding on to me and stuff. Yep, I think of a man of many stories. He's got a lot of stories to tell. I also think of a man who holds respect and honor very close to him. I think that can be displayed in a lot of his actions and a lot of the way he talks.
So the next go-around I had with the Army was being a mail clerk. I got to meet a different kind of people, and I I met the chaplain's assistant. He was a pretty nice guy. I was still going to church back in those days. And got to know him pretty well. He was a nice guy. We traveled around a little bit together. And it's like history repeating itself. He said, well, I got about a week or two left and I'm leaving. Said, what do you think about being the assistant to the chaplain? I said, I don't know. I said, what do you got to do? He said, well, you got an office and you got to go there every day and you got a desk. And you go to mass with him every morning and you lay the robes out for him and you're the altar boy and you help him do whatever he does. And he's a pretty nice guy and I think you like him and why don't you talk to him? His name was Albert W. Wilson. Wasn't a real big man, but he was pretty well built. He was a major. And he'd been in service for quite a while, and I talked to him, and I thought, well, he seems to be a pretty nice guy. And he said, would you like to take the job? I said, yes, I'll take it. And so I became the chaplain's assistant. And by having to go to church every Sunday on Mass, which you did anyway if you were a practicing Christian, I guess, we got Mondays off. So had Saturday off and had Monday off. And he had a little cottage down on the north shore of the beach of Hawaii. We were the barracks were in Oahu, but he was down on the north shore. And he had bought a new car. He had a 55 Plymouth station wagon. I never understood why he got a station wagon, but that's what he had, with a push button drive. And eventually, after I was there a month or so, he said, would you want to go home with me and spend the weekend? You know, hang out and you can go swimming or whatever. He lived right on the beach. So I said, okay. So he took me home with him. He wanted to drive the car. Yeah, I drove his car. And then he said, well, you got to go down and get a license because you're going to be doing a lot of driving. I don't like to drive. So I had to go downtown and get a license. I got a Hawaiian license and drive him for a lot. Drive him home, drive him different places. And I'd go home and he had a two-bedroom place and I had an air mattress to sleep on, which to me was like heaven because I was out of the Army and he fed me, he cooked the meals. I didn't have to really do anything except swim and lay on the sand. He had a lot of coconut trees. And he said, I wish I knew how to get some of those coconuts out that are forever falling. And I said, I know how to get them out. And he said, well, what would you do? And I said, climb up there and cut them out. And he couldn't believe that. He said, well, who would you get to do it? I said, I can do it. And he said, no. So I had learned in my first job over there how to put on a set of spikes and climb telephone poles. So I borrowed a set of spikes from the outfit I was first with and got a machete, went up the palm trees and started cutting down coconuts. And he sat there and watched and took pictures and was amazed at what went on. And the only thing I can say about him was he was one of the nicest people that I encountered while I was there. He was all man, he was all priest, and he was a great guy. Smoked cigars. I never did at that time, but he did. He loved them. We had to go out in the field and we had to go to training to the Big Island. A lot of people are confused with Hawaii because when you say Hawaii, they think of one place, but it's Hawaiian Islands. We were on Oahu, which is where Honolulu and where all the World War II boats were sunk when the Japanese came. But the main island is called Hawaii, and that's where we went for 30 days, once a year. We had once again to load onto a Navy boat, but this time we had to take a Jeep, so it was a little different. I had to go to the motor pool and get the Jeep. Every day we went to the motor pool, the gear shift knob was gone because somebody was missing one. They wouldn't bother go try to get new and they'd just steal yours off your Jeep. Last guy there, guess what, was me, and I never had a knob for mine. But I'd just go get one off the next guy if I was lucky. So we get over there. And it's a long haul from where you land to go up into the mountain, up and up and up. It's a couple thousand feet up, and it's cooler up there. And it's a lava flow from volcanic ash lava has erupted and flowed down the side of this mountain, and you're up there, in a Quonset hut. It's not nice, but you're there on a cot, and that's how you live for 30 days. You have to train while you're there. You don't get away from training. You got to pick up that infamous rifle one more time and go up into the hills. And what do you see but a herd of goats up there running through? Right where you're trying to sleep at nighttime, here comes the goats. You're sleeping on lava rock, so it's not too comfortable. And you walk on that for 30 days. And when I got ready to leave, I took my boots that I had gone over there with and threw them in an unmentionable place. I did not take them back with me because they were wore out. They wore the soles straight off of them in 30 days. The only momentous thing that happened there was once the hood of the Jeep flew open while we were going down the hill. That caused a little bit of commotion. Eventually, May of 1959 came while I was over there. Hawaii became state. That was a shock. But I was still there, and May come along, and a few of my friends that I had went over with and I were talking, and we were all getting ready to be shipped out to come home. We were done, finally. Back on that infamous boat with those cots, again, you can call it a cot, a piece of canvas. Back with the Navy, one more last time. The final time, thank goodness. We got back to California and got in a place where they were going to separate us from the Army. The day came where we were given our severance pay and told goodbye. Had to take an airplane trip from there to Maryland. Came to Washington Airport with one of the guys that left with me named Frank Gonzalez. Went through the whole time with him over there. We'd go to movies and pal around. Kept track, we'd all meet occasionally together, the 4 or 5 of us that were left. One guy decided to stay over there. He re-upped. We thought he was crazy. His name was Farmer, so you can figure. But the rest of us came home and had to get to that airport. And then my dad came in his bar station wagon and picked me up with the family. And the young fellow I was with, he needed to go to another airport to get to Pennsylvania, where he lived. My father carried him to the next airport, and that's the last time I ever heard or seen from him. But I didn't know him for those 3 years, and we had a lot of good times over there. It's good and bad, but it's something I never regretted. But I've listened to young men today talk about going into the Army or the Marine Corps. I've always advised them to go to the Air Force or the Navy, because what are you going to learn how to do? Maybe it's different today, but when I went it was confusing, because radio and TV repair became building a house and learning how to take a M1 apart and how fast you can put it back together, and then see if you can do it blindfolded and all such ridiculous crap, and then go on forced marches where people actually, their soles come off their shoes, and you get the luck to have to carry a machine gun that day, and the other fellow with you carries all the ammo and the tripod, and the machine gun's a little bit heavier than that rifle you've been carrying. So every time you're taking a few steps, you get a little further behind and further behind, and eventually you get chewed out because you're not keeping up. But that was life in the Army, and I never regret serving, but I'm glad for what it was.
I think most recently we went on a trip. It was me and Mom and Michael and Grandad to Lancaster for the day. And of course, any road trip or anything that you do with Michael is going to turn into, you know, a lot of laughs. Yep, we had to stop on the way there at a hotel so Michael could go to the bathroom. And like, I feel like Granny and Grandad just cracked up and laughed at him the entire day. And we had a nice day. We had a nice lunch, and yeah. And then of course I remember when I was pregnant with Shelby, and then the day came, like they were down, and it was late at night, and they were down in the parking lot waiting for her to be born. And then I guess most recently the kids are obsessed with all their little belts that he makes them and puts their name on them and all that. So, and Jeremy and I too, we all have our matching belts.
We're going to talk a little bit about cars. Growing up, I never thought I would become a car person. I had a bicycle when I was a young man. It was maroon. I had one bicycle in my lifetime. I got it when I was very young, and I had it until I got a car. And I rode that bicycle everywhere it would go. To the river, anywhere, everywhere it went. I got a new seat put on it. A lot of new wheels and tubes, but I rode that one bike, and I put a decoration on the front of it off a car hood. Even back then I was monkeying around changing stuff. With some lady that had come off a hood on her, and I put it on front of my bike. But I had one bicycle. So then as I grew older, I began to think about having cars. I did anything I could do to put money aside for a car. And I didn't know whoever told me about the car, but Bus Williams had a garage. He was a local mechanic in town. He had a garage around by the railroad station. And I knew him growing up, knew his children. And I went up there and he said, well, I don't own the car. He said, Lewis Buckle owns the car. It was a white 46 Ford two-door car, sedan, big old car. Had what they call a flathead motor in it. It's not like the V8 cars of the day. It's called a flathead. And the funny thing was the motor was tore up. The car didn't run. That's why I'd been sitting there for almost a year. He said, I don't know what he wants for it, but he said, it's not much good without the motor. He said, just make him an offer, maybe you can get it. I don't know what I paid him for it. But I bought the car. And I don't know how it got from there to Maple Avenue, but it came to where we lived and got parked back in the corner of the backyard. Sit there for another 6 or 8 months with no motor. And my uncle, who was a mechanic, Charles Knott, my mother's brother, went to Preston Ford and bought me a new motor. He didn't pay for it, but he bought it, and I paid for it with the money I had made. And he came around and we parked that car underneath the walnut tree in that backyard. And he told me how to put the motor in and helped me put it in. And we had a jack over the tree limb with a chain and lowered it up and took the old one out and put the new one in. He'd tell me what bolts to put where and what to do what. And naturally I couldn't remember any of it, but somehow we got that car put together and it actually started. It was a miracle. And it was funny because I remember back then the car had a switch key that you had to turn, and then it had a push button, a little knob that you pushed up, and then you pushed the starter button. You had to do 3 things to start that car. And then it was a gear shift car. There wasn't too many automatic cars back in those days. They were gear shifts. You had first gear, second gear, third gear, and reverse. It was called the H pattern. A lot of people got confused because they didn't know how to go to reverse. I never really had much trouble with it. I had already learned that long before I got the car. And we got it running, and I took it up the street, and the accelerator got hung up in it, and it was flying down the street, and I didn't know how to get the car stopped. Trying to get it pushing on the brake. Finally, we got all that fixed. And I remember taking my sisters to school in it, and anywhere else I went with that car.
You got a fast car, and I wanna take it to anywhere. Maybe we make a deal. Maybe together we can get somewhere. Any place is better. Starting from zero, got nothing to lose. Maybe we'll make something. Me, myself, I got nothing to prove. So I remember we were driving in your car. Speed so fast, I felt like I was drunk. City lights lay out before us, and your arm felt nice wrapped around my shoulder. And I had a feeling that I belonged. I had a feeling I could be someone, be someone, be someone. You got a fast car. Is it fast enough so we can fly away? Still gotta make a decision. Leave tonight or live and die this way.
Like I say, we've had at least 80 cars. My grandson Michael has probably aged up me by now. He thinks he has anyway. But we had around 80 cars and 5 or 6 motorcycles and numerous lawnmowers and pickups and Lord knows what else. If it had a motor on it, we probably owned it. So much for the car story.
So I've told this story probably 100 times, but Grandad is the reason that I am, in my opinion, the world's biggest Batman fan. I used to tell everybody I was 4 years old. Well, I found out through going through home movies that I was actually younger. I was 3 years old, and my parents were dropping me off at Granny and Granddad's house. And I don't remember if it was just to stay the night or because they were going out to eat or something. I don't remember. But I remember we had just gotten there, and one of the first things that Grandad said to me, he leaned over, he like bent over, and and said to me, "Do you want to watch Batman?" And I looked up at him and I said, "What's Batman?" And he said, "You don't know what Batman is?" I remember he said just like that, "You don't know what Batman is?" And he went into the kitchen and came back out. There's this cabinet in the kitchen where he used to keep VHS tapes. And he came back out with the 1989 original Batman movie. And we watched it. I remember watching it for the first time with him and just being amazed by everything I was seeing. I absolutely fell in love with it. Watched it 100 more times. Every time I was over there, we'd watch it to the point where finally he just gave me the movie. He's like, "You watch this over and over and over more than I ever do. So here, it's yours now." And to this day, I'm not exaggerating, I've seen that movie probably over 1,200 times. I watch it multiple times a year, every year. I've been watching it since I was 3 years old, nonstop.
This jacket represents 27 years of my life, from 1956 to 1984. This is a daily coat that's worn by people with dress greens, which are not really dress at all, but it's an everyday coat that they wear with a uniform. The blue cord stands for infantry, and they're the only ones that have the blue cord. The top part is the organization that you served in. It has a little pin there that you put on top, and it designates where you were. On this side, you have the U.S. and the branch infantry, showing the brass is for infantry and has a cross rifle. And over here on this side, you have all the ribbons. Each ribbon stands for a medal that you were awarded during your time of service, like National Defense, Recruiter, and finally the last ribbon is your retirement, which I thought was great, but they had a ribbon for that. Underneath that, there's a decoration for a little badge for your marksmanship. And on this side, you got a name tag and a unit citation, and then down beneath that is a Maryland National Guard badge, where we went to school for so many weeks and got the NCO badge. So that's basically what this is. On the sleeves, you see the different things. This represents, each one of these bars is 3 years. So if you take 3 times that, would be that. And this is overseas bars, where you were overseas. So that's pretty much that. This jacket is the dress blue jacket. This is what you would wear to higher functions like military ball or something very important. Again, on the sleeves, each one counts for 3 years. So you can see that. And I haven't put the other things on here because I haven't worn this for many years. It just kind of hangs here now. So there's no need to talk about what goes on. It's basically the same as the other uniform. Only the medals go on here, little small medals and different size things. And it would still have all the same basic things on it as the other one. Sometimes it could be worn with a bow tie instead of a regular black tie, but this is the Army dress blue uniform. Okay, back from the Army, coming home in Dad's station wagon on a cold, dark night in May. I guess it wasn't too cold. But anyway, come back to Ridgely. And it seemed like I thought everything would be exactly just like the day that I left. Just shows you how your mind works. I figured all my friends would be the same and I would know everybody and nothing would change. And when I got home it was a shock because nothing was the same and everything had changed. Almost every kid that I graduated with was married and had children, some of them. And the rest of them were scattered all over the creation. And it was just different. People were different. Different people lived in different houses. And I came home to Maple Avenue in Ridgely. My two sisters were still there. One had graduated and gone to Goldie Beacom School in Wilmington, Delaware. And my other younger sister was still at home. My grandmother lived right across the street. We spent a lot of time going over there. My grandfather had died in 1948 when I was 10 years old. He had a stroke and laid in the bed for 3 years before he died. And my father was over there every night almost, and I went quite a bit of times, and I used to go get him tobacco and bring it home to him. He could tell when he wanted to chew tobacco. He couldn't talk, but he could holler and make enough noise. He knew about that. So get home and everything's new. And one of the things I done while I was in the Army, the base pay was $140 a month. That's what I made when I was in Hawaii. I sent $100 home every month to my mother who put it in the bank. They would go out and blow it or play cards or do this and do that. And I didn't do all that. And I still had most of my money, the 40 bucks left, plus I had 100 home in the bank. When I came home, I had a little over $2,000 in the bank. And I was home about a week, and I still had the old black Chevrolet that my father had been using while I was gone in service. Of course, it was 3 years older. It was a 1950, and then it was a 59. It was 9 years old when I got back home. So, being a young man, like most of us, we were thinking about cars, and I thought, well, see what I could find. 3 doors down the street was a guy named Roger R. Ringel. Everybody called him Toad. Very nice guy. Was a car salesman. Worked in Denton for a Chevrolet dealer called Beck Chevrolet. It's right down from the current post office in Denton. It's a store now where they have clothes and salvage stuff for sale. That was the automobile dealership. He had a brand new 59 Chevrolet Impala 4-door hardtop white that his wife was using as a dealer car. It was parked in front of his house, and I walked over to talk to him about a car, and that one was sitting there, and I asked him about it, and he said it's for sale. He said my wife's using it, and I said, well, can I take a ride in it? And he, sure. And he came back, and I said, I like it. And I said, can we talk about it? So I bought the car. And his wife said, you're going to take my car. I'll never forget her saying that. And I said, yes, I'm afraid I am. So it was white and it had red seats inside and a gray roof to it. Red and white seats. It was a pretty automobile. I put fender skirts on it. That's all I did to it. And it was an odd shaped car. It was a 59. You got to really look at them. It had tail fins that were unbelievable, and what we call cat eyes on the back of a great big different colored taillights on the back. But it was a nice car, it ran well, and I was happy with it. Had a great good sized motor in it. So then the next thing was, what are you gonna do? You're home, and started looking for a job. And I'm kind of lost because I don't even remember now where I went to get a job. I went down and talked to K&B Market under Lanky Bilbro. No, things had moved on there for 3 years, and he didn't have any need for anybody to work in the store. So I just kept looking around and didn't have much luck. And somebody said, why don't you go up to DuPont up to Dover? Said they're hiring, and I didn't know anything about DuPont or Dover. Well, I rode up there and put an application in. Wasn't long, I got called back up there, and they said you have this job, and it was working in something called a polyfab machine, and you get a chuckle out of this because what it was, it's a girdle place. They made women's girdles, and they hung them on a board that was cut out of plastic or hardwood, a big board with 2 hooks on the top. And these boards had this leather latex girdle on them, sprayed on them. And your job was 50 of them come on a rack, and you had to stand there next to this very hot machine on a platform and take those 2 handles and take them off that rack and hang them on a rack that kept rotating and never stopped. It was going around, and that was taking them through a heat process where it would finish off what they had sprayed that rubber on that form with, and that would finish the product. And it was good money, and I found a guy that worked there, lived right down there behind my uncle's house. I could ride to work with him. He had another original boy rode with him, and 2 women that rode up there. We all went together, rode to Dover every morning, and come home every night, coming back with the sun right in your eye. And if you worked overtime, you could make good money. And I was tickled with the job, and everything was going pretty well. And in the meantime, I was dating whoever I could find that would go out on a date with me. I didn't really care much. I didn't have any preference. I guess I did too. I won't go into that. But I went with most anybody I could get a date with. And so at that time, I was talking to one of my cousins. I had been called to go to Denton Armory. They sent me a letter that I had to report there, and I had to report to an armory after 3 years in the Army. So I went over there, and they told me that it was a mistake. I didn't have to come over there, but they wanted to know if I was interested in joining the Guard, and they showed me around. One of the fellows took me around and showed me everything. And I said, well, I want to thank you very much, but I said, I'm not really interested. I just got done with it, and I don't want to fool with it again. So I'm working up to latex, living life, and everything was going on fine. And guess who? Got a phone call one day, and it was a forgotten ex-fiance who was now engaged to someone else, and said, I'd like to talk to you. I'd like to get together and talk. Well, that's the last thing I was expecting, but I got in my little car and we went somewhere and we talked for a lengthy conversation, and we found out that we apparently still had feelings for one another. And we talked about getting back together, and I said, well, when I went away, I was in the service. I said, there wasn't much to do. Went in town one night and drank too many beer, and I never wasn't used to drinking beer, and got polluted, and that ended our relationship. But I said, now the boy you're engaged to is in the service, and I know how it works, and I can't think about going with you unless you tell him that you're going to break off with him and give him back what's his, and if you want to get together that way, fine. So she did, we did, and we started seeing one another. Came home from work one day, got in, walked around, got dropped off, or walked around home. car was sitting in the yard. Everything I owned was in my car. Everything that I physically owned. And I didn't know what was going on there with the car and there was stuff. And very shortly thereafter, I was told that I was no longer welcome to live at my mother's house, and she didn't want me there, and there was my stuff. So there wasn't no explanation given, just I didn't know, couldn't figure what I had ever done. Thought I was a halfway decent person, but never had any trouble with my father. Mother and I were very much alike. We never seemed to be able to get on the same wavelength, but Dad and I, we always got along pretty good. So later on, I think it all revolved back to the fact that I was seeing this young lady again, and we were getting serious, and we were talking about getting married. And I was a Catholic, and she wasn't. And back in those days, it was a big thing. Catholics married Catholics. I suppose most people did, but some didn't, because my father was a Methodist. He married her back in 1937, so I don't know where she got off with that, but that was her. I said it really didn't make no difference. So I'm out looking for a home. I got no place to live. So I went somewhere, I think to my Charles Knott cousin, and stayed one night. I think that's where I went for the first night. And then I went to see my other cousin, Lou Cherry, who was my father's sister's son. He was 5 years older than I am. He was married, had one daughter at the time, lived on a little farm between here and Denton. And we grew up a couple houses away from one another, but he was 5 years older, so we were never real tight because he was always more interested in people his age, and he didn't want to be fooling around with a kid. But I mean, he was my cousin, and I told him, and he said, yeah, you can stay here. I was working up the latex, and I knew his wife. I'd seen her in school, knew who she was, and they had a very nice young daughter. So I moved into the coldest room on the Eastern Shore in that house. It was on the north side. And I talked to a guy named Wilbur Krause, who also slept in that room because he was related to them when he came visited. And we agreed that that was the worst room in Maryland to sleep in. It was so cold. But he was good to me, and they left me alone. I did what I wanted, and eventually I ate meals when I was there. She cooked for me. And eventually she offered to do my clothes, which I was shocked, but she did them. And so we got along pretty good. And I was talking to him about the guard again. He said they're going to have a full-time job come open over there in Denton at the Armory. And he said, I don't know what the pay is, but he said it's a lot closer to Dover. And he wanted to know if I would think about it. And I said, yeah, I really wasn't interested, but I said, I'll think about it. So one thing led to another, and we approaching November, December, and they get a phone call, and my mother, well, we'd like for you to come back home before Christmas. And I said, well, you put my father on, I'll talk to him. I said, if he wants me to come home, I'll come home. Little did I know, he probably wasn't the boss at all, but anyway, we talked it over, and he said, come on home, and I did. And they knew by that time that I was figuring on getting married, so there wasn't no squabbling anymore about that, because that was done, over, and gone. And I was home at Christmas. That was Christmas of '59. And I spent that Christmas Eve in Queen Anne with my fiance again, who did not have a ring this time, but we had word of mouth that we were engaged and we were going to get married in January. The reason we got married in January, I was 21 in August, and she was going to turn 21 on the 27th day of January. That was her birthday. She wanted to be 21 on the day we got married, so nobody could tell us anything about not being old enough, what we could do, or etc. So we agreed to the 30th of January. That was going to be our wedding day on a Saturday. And then once again, here we are, with no place to live and nowhere to go and no furniture, no nothing. Had a car, big deal, couldn't live in it. My uncle lived right outside of Ridgely on a big farmhouse. He was an insurance salesman. He had left the milk company by then and gone into the insurance business. And he had this big farmhouse that he had empty, and my dad said, well, talk to Grace and said maybe you can rent his house. So yeah, sure, glad to have you. You know, this is how much you wanted. It was minimal. Of course, back then it was more because the pay that I got when I started working for the company over there was $4,040 a year. And we lived better on that than we do now. But anyway, we rented his house on Holsinger Lane. It's on the corner of Holsinger Holly. The house is still standing there. It's a monstrous house. Looks like an old Western hotel. You went upstairs and all you could see was a long hall with doors. And we bought enough furniture for, I guess I had a kitchen table. And I don't know if we bought a sofa, it had one, but we bought a living room suite and a bedroom suite. That's what we started off with. And one of my other uncles, my mother's brother, came frequently, and he was forever bringing something out there for us to have. Yeah. Knives or rugs or something. I was never that close to him, but he was very good to us. And that's where we wound up. But first we had to get married, so we decided on January, and it was going to be in the Catholic Church. And my wife picked out who she wanted for the bridesmaids. My two sisters were included, which was nice. And back in those days, the simple church rules, you had to have Catholics to be in the church. So I couldn't invite my friends who were non-Catholic to be in the party. I had to go with other people. And some people I was sorry I did not have, but I didn't. And we wound up on that Saturday. It was a bright, shiny day, and as we were walking or going by, we heard one of my aunts say, "I'm going to go home, mark this on the counter so I'll know when the baby's coming." And we always kind of got a laugh out of that because she had a long wait. It took her about 16, 17 months for that baby to get here. Normal time was 9 months, I believe, for a child. But she knew everything too. She's one of them smart people that knows. And we had a very nice wedding. We had a little reception there at the church hall. Then we came back to Bill Conley's house, which Bill had married her sister in May of '56. I attended that wedding and reception and met Jake Gibson at that time in my life. I had known the other two brothers and sister. We came around there and she changed her clothes and we got ready to leave. I had the car there with the windows down, and Jake, the very person I had met at Faye's wedding, came out with a bag full of rice and held it and dumped it in my car. And we kept that car to 1962. And every time we put the brakes on, rice come trundling down out of the dash and from various places. He must have threw a ton of it in there because he sure did fill it up. And we were going to go on our honeymoon to Virginia. And I remember distinctly leaving Risley, and the car had stuff brewed all over it, and toilet paper, and whatever else they could think of. And I went down 404, I guess that's what it was called back then. It is now. We got all the way down to Route 50 and turned right and stopped toward the big ridge. I got out of that car and I wiped everything off the windows and cleaned the whole car up so we looked like normal people riding down the road instead of people riding by and waving at you and blowing a horn and all this because they just married on. So then we proceeded on down to Richmond for our first night of our honeymoon. Got a motel room, and then we went to church. Was still going to church. They both went to church, and then we went out to supper, and then we went back to begin our married life.
Hey, Dad. I guess my favorite memory is you teaching me how to drive a truck. Going down the road and got to Easton, almost ran in the back of a car. And you said, "You see them little red things? That means you got to slow down and stop. Because if you don't stop, you're going to run into the car and tear my truck up." So, and the other favorite thing is when you let me take the pickup truck and put the chrome wheels on it and ride around Easton. So that was pretty cool. But then you got mad at him because it was eating your gas mileage up. And I had to take the wheels back off. So that's one of my favorite memories in life.
Our daughter, who was born on the 4th of May, 1961, came into this world just a month or two before my wife's father, Jacob A. Gibson Sr., died. And he did come to Ridgely and see her and held her before he left this earth. And that was a sad point for my wife and also myself, that he was no longer there to enjoy our children. But our oldest child, the girl who you would least imagine would give you a hard time, she would go to school. Oh, well, this is many years later. She actually had a car. She would go to school and park the car and take off and play hook and go to the beach with one of her friends. We'd get a call from school saying your daughter didn't show up today. So her mother would go down there with a spare key and take the car and move the car.
Okay, I had a girlfriend named Norma Lee, and one day we decided that we were going to hook school. And we went with her sister and her boyfriend to, I can't know if it's called Sandy Point or Stony Point across the Bay Bridge. Anyway, it was a little beach over there. So we went there, and when we got home, I went in the school parking lot to get my car, and my car was gone. So it turns out it was parked up in front of the main entrance of the building. And Mom had been in there, and I guess the school told her that I wasn't in school. But I ended up with a month's detention before school. My girlfriend hated me. And I don't really think I played hooky after that.
And then she had a few other tricks that she pulled, and she should have been a boy, but she was a girl, and she had her moments, and I guess we did too. But all in all, she went to, in her senior year, she went to LPN classes through school, and she graduated from school as an LPN. We were very proud of her during that time, and it all worked out well. She went to work as a nurse. That was the beginning of her time out of school. Chris came along in May the 29th, 1962. They were a little over a year apart. Chris was a quiet boy. He wasn't much trouble. He was a good child. Chris was a sickly child. He had asthma. He never played any sport whatsoever in school. It hurt him to play, and he couldn't play. And home, living in Queen Anne, it was quiet. There wasn't much going on there, maybe a few ball games. But we had a neighbor, and somehow him and Chris got these nets that they played with, lacrosse sticks, and they got out in the road and threw that lacrosse thing back and forth, and Chris really enjoyed that, and he went to school and signed up for the lacrosse team, and he loved it. That was the only sport he ever played, and then he got sick. He had asthma. He missed a week at school. When he went back to school, the doctor made him run around the school. Every day they had to run wind sprints around the school. I understood that because I played soccer when I was in school. And every day they had to run 2 or 3 times around the school before they would practice with lacrosse. So when he went back to school, the doctor made him run for every day he had missed.
The teacher.
The teacher, and Then I got a phone call about it, and I went out there and I asked the man, I said, "Are you crazy?" I said, "Nobody makes a sick person do what you've done." I said, I don't know what you're thinking about." I said, "He just got well and now you're doing this." So we were not very happy, and a few years later my wife was up to the doctor's office, and the same doctor come in with his child, and guess what? The young man had asthma. So what goes around comes around. Later on, Kevin came.
All hell
Kevin came. He was our third child and our second boy. Him and Chris were always into a scrap, and when they went playing with toys out in the sandbox, Kevin would get up on top of the shed and wrap a cape around his shoulders, and he'd be Batman or Superman and jump off the shed and scare his mother and I to death. And he didn't bother him because he thought he was Superman. He could fly. But growing up, Kevin was Kevin. Chris was forever into automobiles. As soon as he learned how to turn a wrench, he was working on cars. He was in the back shed taking cars apart, putting motors in, busting my tools up that I had never used, doing all kind of other things behind cars, putting motors in, racing cars. But here was Kevin. Kevin was different. He didn't really care much about cars, unless he was running one of them. He cared about that. But when he would go out on a date, he would be told to be home at 10 o'clock at night. If he was in Easton or Cordova, no matter where he went on the date, when 10 o'clock come, he was faithfully getting in his car and ride 100 miles an hour home to try to get there by 10 o'clock. And it never worked. He could never be home at 10 because he left at 10. One time when he left Cordova at 10 o'clock, the axle and the wheel combined came off of his car and went down the road, and he called me up and said, "I've lost my car. My car's tore up. Part of it's sitting here." And he had more girlfriends than the other two combined. He did more tricks than anybody in the family. And he was always in a scrap, and I had to go to school numerous times to talk to a little principal who was there, and the little principal taught football, and he was a small statured man, but he thought he was a big man, like a lot of small men. He was the bad. So Kevin went to school one day, and they had a fight in the cafeteria, food fight they called it. I was unaware of such things. Didn't happen when I was in school, but they had this fight, and somehow Kevin got blamed for it. He told the man that he didn't do this, and the teacher insisted he did do it, and it kept going and getting worse and going to it back and forth. And Kevin said, "Well, if you want to walk outside and step off the school property, we'll decide about this right now." Well, needless to say, the man didn't step outside, but he did call me up one more time.
I was in high school, and some guy accused me of throwing food on him and hitting him and getting into a fight in school. And I didn't throw the food. There was a guy alongside of me. He threw the food, but I got in trouble for it and had to call Dad down to the high school. And he was in the National Guard. He come down there, and they were gonna kick me out of school. And I kind of got smart with the principal and had to go outside and sit out in the truck and had a long talk with my father. Dad finally said he heard enough.
And then he told me the story again and again and again, and I heard it about 15 times, it seemed like. So by this point, I began to get the picture pretty clear, and I said, well, let's go in and talk to the teacher. So we went in school, and we went in his office, which is next door to the principal, and all the doors opened. The principal was in her office. She was a very nice lady. We went into his, and I told him, I said, I've listened to my son for almost an hour, and I said, he's never lied to me. And I said, I can't believe that he would fabricate something as much as this is to tell me that this happened, and you're telling me it happened, but he's telling me it didn't. And I said, and this is several times I've come to this school, and every time I've came, I made him apologize to you, and we have left. But I said, this time I'm going to tell you this. If I ever come again to the school, you will not have one Winstead to deal with. You're going to have two, because I've decided that he's telling me the truth, and I don't appreciate what went on here today.
If this ever happens again, you accuse my son of something he didn't do, you're not going to have one Winstead to deal with, you're going to have two of us. And we're going to take you across the street, and I'm going to let my son kind of do what he wants to do.
Mark came Molly, but he turned out to be Mark. And he joined us in January 1966. And that was the last job we had. Never thought I would have 4 children, other than 3 boys. I was the only boy. I always wanted a brother, never had one. Now I had 3 boys. I used to wrestle with them, fool with them, and try to do things that made them happy, but I could never please but 1 or 2 at a time. Chris liked to ride horses with me. Kevin, he liked cars, but he was supposed to stay off by himself. Mark, he was just kind of Mark, but he was very quiet. And at one point in his life, we had pictures taken of Chris when he was in school. We had those pictures laying on a bookcase in Queen Anne, and we opened them up one day, and we were looking at the pictures, and we were in awe of the pictures because we were looking at Mark. And she said, no, this is Chris. But it was Mark, and they looked identical at that age. It was just scary that they could look that much alike. He played with toys, and he grew up quiet, and he got good marks in school. He was like his sister. He was on the honor society. She got the full benefits. She got to wear the blue cloak, and she got recognized and put in the book, and he made the same thing she did, but he got the shaft because they admitted him. They didn't know that he had made it, and a year later they told us that he should have been there, but that didn't help much. He was already out of school by that point. But got married, and we built a little shed out back. There was no outbuildings in this house at all when we moved here. So we went down to Easton and looked at a shed, and we came home and built it. It wasn't the greatest, but it's still standing. And I've stored a lot of stuff in it. It was my workshop when we built it. But now, years later, he come along and we built the barn. And I got all this material to build it with. And at the last minute, Mark found a guy that already had walls made and wasn't going to use them. So I swapped that fellow the lumber for the walls. And we got a carpenter and a helper. And Mark and his 2 brothers and I built this barn, which today I have my workshop upstairs, and then it's a 1-car garage downstairs. But from the day we moved here in 1986 to this house, the first thing we did was hang lights in the attic, and it's never quit. Anything that's ever had to be worked on or done, he's always come and helped. And in addition to that, he's always been very generous with his time and taking us places and going and doing things. He's been a great son, and we're both very proud of him. So, thank you, Mark.
So I remember back in the day when I used to go over to Grandad and Granny's house, I would watch the movie The Phantom, and then Grandad had this book that was of The Phantom that he shared with me, and he let me borrow it every time I would come over, and then eventually he ended up giving it to me, and I actually still have the book to this day.
A couple of things that I wanted to touch on was things that I liked during my lifetime. I liked in school, I liked playing soccer and agricultural class. Of course, I had the same teacher for both, so I think I liked him too. But I enjoyed playing ball for 4 years. Made the team all 4 years. And then while I was living home, I always wanted a horse. And we had a big double barn for a garage. My father kept his car in half of it, and I fixed the other half up with a as a place for a horse. And I had a bridle. I remember hanging there in the hay put hay in the building and asked him could I have a horse. Some other people in town actually had horses back in those days. That was in the 50s in Ridgely. And his answer was no, we're not going to have a horse. So anyway, wherever I would go, we had friends that mostly had ponies that I would get to ride. And spent a lot of time after Mr. William Evans, who was a bus driver and a farmer. He had a little pony and I rode it a lot. And the wood farm, they had ponies, I rode them. My cousin had a horse, I rode that. I always had a love for horses. So when we were married living in Queen Anne, we had those buildings out back. And why this happened, I'll never know. I went to the sale barn out on 404 and bought a little male stallion horse, pony, and brought it home and put it in the backyard in this building. And it was big enough for it to be there, and we fed it and kept it there, cleaned up the mess. Then we had to go buy a new saddle. We bought that down in Cordova from a fellow. And the kids got to ride the pony around the yard. But it was a cantankerous little devil, and it would bite you or kick you or whatever it could do. I couldn't ride it because I was a groom, so it was only good for the children. And we had a neighbor then. Of course, we lived next door to the Methodist parsonage at Queen Anne. And we always had preachers going and coming. This particular one had a daughter, and she was almost an adult. She wouldn't know if she could ride the pony. She came over there and rode it, and I think it gave her a big bite right where she didn't want to get one. And that was the end of her horseback riding, so she didn't ask no more. But we had that pony for a while, and by then I had got the fever back. I wanted to ride myself. So we decided we would sell that pony and we'd get a larger one that I could ride. So one of my friends knew a guy that had a pony that was a large, it come from Chincoteague, which was a big deal. It was a Chincoteague pony. Misty of Chincoteague, you've probably heard of that. But this was one of the ponies that grew up on the isle, and it was almost horse size. It was a female, brown and white. And Bill Dudley outside of town owned the pony. And of course, one of my friends, Frank Sherwood or Jack Shortwright, told me. I looked at it and I said I'd buy it from him. So my wife and I went out there, and I didn't even have a saddle that would fit the horse. I had a bridle, but I knew everything because I could ride it home. And we went out there to the farm, which is 2 or 3 miles outside of town. And we finally got the pony caught up, and I got on the pony and started riding toward Queen Anne. And I went maybe a quarter mile, and it wouldn't go. It refused to go, just stopped. And every time it would stop, it would turn around and try to go back where it had come from. And this went on for half hour, 40 minutes. My wife was in the truck waiting patiently, and I'm doing all kinds of things I could do to get the horse to go, the pony to go, and it won't go. Here come Frank's brother, Bud Sherwood. They had been around horses and ponies all their lives, grew up on a farm. And Bud stopped and he said, "So you having some trouble?" I said, "A little bit." I said, "I can't get this pony to leave." I said, "I guess he don't want to leave here." He said, "You want me to ride him in town for you?" I said, "If you don't mind." He jumped on that pony, and away they went. Wasn't no hesitation, went right on. I made arrangements with Jack Gibson, my brother-in-law, to keep him down at his house. He had a large field and a shed. So I was now in the horse business. I had this large, and I rode it around the ballpark in town and in and out of different places and wherever I could go. I finally got an English saddle. Never won another one. But that was my first saddle. I had an English saddle, and I rode that pony with that. Well, like I said, she was almost as big as a horse. While I had her there, she had a colt, and by that time I decided I was really going to have horses, and I took her and the colt up to Felton. I think it was Felton, to a sale, and sold them both up there. Jack Shortle had a horse young horse that he was thinking about selling. He had the horse's mother. They were both big horses. The particular one that he was going to sell was maybe 3 years old, which is very young at that point. It was a half Arabian horse and half grade horse, which grade just meant that it was a horse. It wasn't a brand or anything like an Arabian or whatever. But it was a big horse. It was brown and white. And I looked at it, and it was a big horse. I went out and told Jack I was going to buy the horse. He was tickled. I bought the horse and brought it to Queen Anne. I could ride this one, but I could catch him and get on him. A lot of times I put the saddle on the horse, put my foot up in the saddle, but at the same time I was putting my foot up, he'd be gone. And you talk about fun trying to go across that field and get on a horse with your foot in or out of the saddle and him starting to run. It was quite. I finally mastered that and got him so I could get on him. And I kept him for almost 20 years. The horse had no quit in him. He would never ever stop. I raced a lot of people who had fast horses. And I was a big man. I weighed 220, 225. I had a saddle, 50, 60 pounds. He was a big horse, but no matter who he raced, he won. I never lost a race on him. One guy dragged down to Aztec one year how fast his horse was. Naturally, all the guys sick me on him. And, well, I beat him again. So that was like he never give up. And I kept him a long time here in Queen Anne. And then we decided we were thinking about moving. We had to do something with the horses. So I went out and talked to Jack. The horse was 20 years old by then. And I went back out there and I said, would you like to have Ike back? He said, I've got two now, I can't afford to give you anything for him. I said, don't want nothing. Let me have one of your horses that you don't want. I'm going to take him to the auction. Whatever money I get, that's it. You can have Ike if you want him back. He took him. And he was, like I said, 20 years old. And he rode him up the Fair Hill after that, after the ride that I had. I was up there when I rode him up there at 21 because I joked about it. I said he's 21 years old this year and he's decided he doesn't want to do this anymore. He went up on top of a little hill after we were riding for a half hour or so and he stopped. And I cried because for 20 years this horse was a handful. And today he didn't want to go. It was very unlike the horse. So it was a very sad parting when he left, but he left and at that point we were getting ready to leave the town of Queen Anne. So then we moved to Risley, but had a lot of fun with him at different rides. Went to Fair Hill, went to Chincoteague, Assateague, all around town, all different towns around with fellows that I knew, the local trail rides. And it was a lot of fun. It wasn't too much fun for my wife because she got left home, but after we got the camper and went on some of the bigger rides, she got to go and talk with some of the girls. That was nice for her. But I don't like to say this, but he was a hell of a horse.
Are we live?
We're live.
All right, let's do it. By God, Bull Butter. I would say a good memory of Grandad is when we went to Connecticut to pick up that truck he had to have. And we took that little Toyota and barely made it there and got yelled at by the police in New York. And then we got lost on the way home from each other. That's a pretty good story, by God.
all along Queen Anne, we had a pretty good life. And when we moved down there, the town was very quiet. There wasn't much going on. My wife had grew up there, her mother was still there, her brother was there. And a lot of people I got to know were there. And one of those people was George Pepper and Joe Shortle. My next door neighbor was Joe. And George Pepper lived uptown. And I had known him before that. And they decided to come talk to me about becoming a member of the town council. I could care less. I was not into politics. I didn't want to be involved. And they said, well, why don't you? Said, we can't find anybody. They told the truth. They couldn't find it. Nobody wanted a job. So they finally convinced me into running for the town council job. So I did. And very few votes got me in because most people didn't even care enough to go to the firehouse to vote. But I won the election and I got in the council. And if you were there, a term of 3 years was the total term. The last you were there, you became the mayor of the town, automatic, because it was on a rotating basis. And the first guy there would be the first guy to leave. And if he was there first, and 2 years later he was the mayor, and then the next year he was gone unless he ran again for re-election. So I came, and we did a lot of ordinances in the town. We talked about not letting trucks, tractor trailers park on the streets. We talked about dogs getting dog tags, which never really happened. And we did a lot of, we passed a lot of ordinances in the town, but we never really had a town cop. So we never got anybody to back them up. And that's just the way it was. And I had one guy lived there named Professor Clark. He lives up on Main Street on the corner in the big house where you go down the hill to the old road to Easton. Him and his mother lived there. And he wore a white shirt and necktie. Cutting his grass. And he called me up and wanted to know if I would come around to his house. He had a problem. I didn't know whether I was a councilman or the mayor, but I went. He wanted me to shovel his gutters out because they were clogged up with dirt. And being the nice person I was, I shoveled them out. And I thought how crazy this was that I'm supposed to be a council member and I'm around here shoveling dirt for some guy too old to do it. So anyway, I ran again after that, and that was 2 terms. And this time, Gussie Gibson was a member of the town council. Well, it was never dull when Gussie was there. Gussie always had a project going on, and he always had something to talk about. And he'd either make you laugh, or he'd be telling you where you could go to get a good meal and eat. But that was Gussie. It was never dull. And him and a guy named L were the 2 council members, Don L. And they said, we need to talk about having hogs in the town of Queen Anne. I said, having hogs? Yep, we got the problem with somebody lives here, and he's right across the river, Jack. He's in the town limits, and he's got hogs. And we don't like that. We want to do away with it. And Gussie said, yeah, you can smell them pretty good up my way. So we decided, we passed ordinance there would be no hogs allowed in the town. Well, somebody had to go tell this guy, and I don't know who told him. They probably sloughed it off on me because I was the mayor and I was the youngest member there of the 2 of them. They kind of thought it was funny that they could get me to do these things. So the fellow that had the hogs wasn't too happy. And he was an older guy and he'd lived there for years. I guess he'd always had hogs. So time went on and nothing happened. We decided, well, we got to go to court. We had to go to Centerville to court, the 3 of us and him and whoever, and discuss the problem of having hogs in the town of Queen Anne. And I said, well, Gussie, I said, you brought this up. I said, I guess you can do the talking. Oh, no, you're the mayor, and the mayor has to do, you're in charge, so you'll have to do the talking. I acted like the old man, and I felt bad about it. But I had to get up and make a speech about hogs in Queen Anne. That was one of the highlights of my term there as mayor. hogs of all things. Later on, I was done. Here they come, someone else. Well, we need a commissioner. Will you consider coming back? No. Well, we got to have somebody, and you know all about it. So I went, and they let me, I signed up, and they come to vote for me getting in to run, and it made the newspaper headlines. Started Democrat, 3 votes wins. It wasn't a total of 3 votes over the last person, it was a total of 3 votes, period. 3 votes wins. And the person who talked to me says, who were the 3 votes? You, your wife, and who? I said, 3 votes were 3 votes. My wife and I did not vote because I wasn't interested in the job. But I got put into it and I'll do it. So I did it. And before that term was ended, the next guy in line, right at the end of my term of the 3 years, I was getting ready to get out again. The next guy decided he didn't want to be part of it, so he wanted to know if I'd stay another time and I could just, instead of starting all over, I'd just stay the mayor. Okay, this is my 4th time as mayor of the town of Queen Anne. So this time they had royalty, who was, I have a book here somewhere, royalty from England coming to look at cattle down on the island. And you got a formal invitation, Lord so-and-so, or whoever he was, Duke so-and-so. He was somebody related to the Queen, and he was coming with his wife and with his people. And the town council and a few selected members were invited to go down, have luncheon with him, and look at the cattle. I was thrilled. I could care less about seeing a cow. I grew up with them. But you don't get to see a guy in England too often who's related to the Queen. So my wife and I went down and ate underneath the tent at a nice meal, which we didn't really enjoy because it wasn't of our liking, but we ate it and we got to see the royal couple and we got to see the cow. And I think I resigned on the same day as that because I was getting close to getting out, and I had put a letter in, a resignation. And that wound up my 3 years. A lot of other crazy things happened during that period where we made a lot more town ordinances. But one of the things, somebody wanted to know the correct address for the town. We had to have a map drawn up or something while I was there, and I didn't know the names. There wasn't any names. I asked my wife, and she said, well, we lived on Broad Street. And I don't know if that was the street that went by her house or up and down by her house or where it was. She didn't think it was the one went up and down by our house. So I let this go on for a while, and I asked around some more, and nobody could come up with the names of the town, the street names. So I said, okay, we got to have a name. So I named it the town. Park Avenue started coming off of Eastern Road where you turn right into Queen Anne. You come up past the railroad track, crossed over by Ely Lumber to a stop sign, shot straight on across to another stop sign, went straight down into the ballpark. That's how I named it. It was called Park Avenue because it went to the ballpark. The street we lived on, I named First Street. I was the mayor, so I took a little bit of liberty in moving myself uptown, like moving on up. I lived on First Street, even had a number. We were uptown. Railroad Avenue was where my brother-in-law lived because he lived up near the railroad tracks next to him, and we named that Railroad Avenue. And I think there was only 3 streets in the whole town. Oh yeah, Main Street was Main Street. Come down the street and turn left and go to Denton, or turn right and go wherever. The old Easton Road. So you had 4 names, and I went down to St. Michael's and met an elderly gentleman down there who had a forge and made all kind of signs and things, and he was a very talented person. And I asked him, he had made all the signs for the town of St. Michael's. If you go to St. Michael's today and you look at a street sign, you'll see the identical signs that we had made in Queen Anne. And he made them himself. And so anyway, I ordered the signs and he made them. I brought them home, I ordered the post, and I hung the signs myself. Put the sacrament in the ground and put the signs up. Now Queen Anne was officially on the map. We had street signs. We lived there a few more years, and by the time we left there, half the street signs had disappeared. I don't know where they went to, but they were gone. People ran into them, knocked them down. They were never replaced. And riding through there today, I see there's been another sign added. It says Chairs Street. And I was shocked. Chairs Street was an alleyway that ran between the parsonage and Mr. Calvin Blades' house and ran up toward the far house. It was an alley. But that was the entrance to the Chairs John Deere building. And someone, I guess in the Chairs family, decided that they wanted to name it Chair Street. And I had no problem with that because I figured they had been there a lot longer than I had. And if that made them happy, then I was happy. So now they've got 5 street signs, as far as I know, in Queen Anne.
I'd say when Granddad would pick me up, he'd always be the one to pick me up, take me where I gotta go. I gotta spend time with my grandfather, especially towards the last time he picked me up. Got a little emotional, but I don't know, I guess over the years, I think when Dad moved to Queen Anne, and I say when we always built on the garages, but that was with everybody, with Granddad, Uncle Mark, Uncle Dan. I mean, those are pretty much it, honestly.
And everybody had gotten married by that time. They were all married and they all had their own homes. And the first thing happened was Chris and Vicki announced that they were going to have a child. They had a daughter named Christy Ann. She was a very nice looking young lady and very, very nice child. And not to be outdone, Kevin announced that he was also going to have a child, and him and Kathy, and that was Jessica. So you got 2 girls right off the bat. And I had 1 girl and 3 boys, and here I got 2 boys, 3 boys, and they're having daughters left and right. I said, wow, things are evening up here. Granny was tickled. She had girls coming finally. And there was Jessica. So far we've got Chris and Kevin. But that wasn't the end. Mark hung in there, and here come his first, Matthew Ryan. I remember the name well because it was posted on the banner at the church when we went to watch him be baptized. Matt came along, and he was our 3rd grandchild, who we've greatly enjoyed being with. Then back to Kevin, he had his 2nd child by that time, and that was Mallory Kevin Jr. Him and Jessica and Kevin lived in Chestertown with Kathy during their young life, and then eventually they moved to Queen Anne without Kathy. Vicki and Chris were a little slow getting around to number 2, but when he came, he made up for it. There was Michael. But Michael is Michael, and he's got a good heart. He'll come if you need him. He always, when he leaves here, he always says, if you need me, call me. And he does. He's come and helped me numerous times over the years. And it's been very nice having him. Mary Faye, who was one of the early ones to leave home, not the last, but one of the early, she left home, got divorced, got remarried to Dan, and they had a child, Dan Lane Jr. And he soon became one of our favorites because we visited her more than anybody else. I guess this was her mother's doing, but Seemed to me like we were on the road to Preston a lot of times, and we went down there for Christmases and so on. We went to see the others too, but I think she kind of had the top billing for her mother, and so we got to see Danny a lot. And he turned into a very nice young man also. Mark and Cherry's second child was Mitchell, and he was unlike Matthew in every way, in every respect. They didn't look alike, they didn't act alike, but I understand that because we had children that were just as different as night and day, and I think that's how it is. Rarely do you get two that really favor, and sometimes they do, sometimes they don't, but so at this point we thought we were done, and it was sad, but Mark and Sherry decided to go their separate ways, and that were Mark married Tracy Ebling. She was, maiden name was Tracy Christopher, and they have been married ever since, and that's 20-some years, I guess, now that they've been together. They had the last grandchild that we had, and that was Jacob. But when Jacob came along, we kept him mostly in the living room. I guess it was winter time, but his favorite thing was school bus, and he would run to the door and announce school bus, and he would get in the doorway and shut the other door, and he would stand in between the screen door and the house door. I don't know how he ever got in there, but between that and when she brought him every morning of his life, when Tracy would bring him to our house, before she could get the door open and get him in her arms to hand him to Granny, the first thing he said was, "Scrapple, Granny." He said that every morning that he ever came here, and he is still eating scrapple to this day, and I'm just absolutely astounded. I love to know how much scrapple this young man has consumed over his lifetime.
Well, I have a lot of favorite memories with Grandad. All the times we've all gone camping. Him and Granny would always come to our sporting events and all of our school events. And the one that really stands out the most to me is when I was in, I would think, 2nd or 3rd grade. And there was a song, and it was a Christmas show. And it was called Boogie On Down to Brown Street. Well, ever since then, Grandad will always come up to me randomly and say, "Jessica, let's go boogie on down to Brown Street." So that's what sticks out to me the most about Grandad.
Is that you, Santa Claus?
First thing I think of when I think of Grandad is, of course, Santa Claus. I feel like that's what everybody's gonna say.
Santa Claus, man.
Santa Claus.
Oh, St. Nicholas. Oh, man.
I didn't remember that, but I remember Granddad being Santa Claus. You really thought it was really Santa Claus. But no, that was Granddad.
Ho ho. Santa Claus, one of my favorite times of the year, I guess, especially my wife's favorite time, was always Christmas. And I guess I kind of got the vote too after being married so long. But Santa started back in the 50s when I was in Hawaii. I dressed up for Santa for some outfit, and somebody was kind enough to take my picture standing there on the balcony in the Santa suit. And that's the first known earliest picture that I have of Santa. And then after we got married and the children come along, I recollect it as being 1994 that this mess started with Santa thing, because I went out on my first run as Santa with the suit, actually physically changed clothes there, becoming Santa Claus and not the person who had left town.
I do too.
Well, if y'all come in here. No. Sit down, Matt.
Danny, stay here.
We're a month away till Christmas.
And it was a happy time for all of us. But that went on with my children and their children and their children, to include grandchildren and great-grandchildren. And the last official photograph of me as Santa Claus was taken on River Road at Chris's home and Vicky's. Chris had left us of Clayton. When Clayton was born, I told Vicky that I wasn't doing Santa anymore. The year before, it had been very difficult for me to go through with it, and I decided not to do it. And she begged me to put the suit on one more time and get my picture taken with Clayton, because that way she would have her family with pictures of me. So I did, and somewhere around here there's a picture of Clayton, probably in the Santa book. But I really wasn't too upset, because I knew I had a young man who wanted and felt almost like I did about the Santa Claus thing. I had seen him perform at his father's house. He had a nicer suit than I had. I was really teed off because my suit wasn't too nice. His was really pretty. And but anyway, he loved it the same way I did. And I asked him, his suit is tore up, and I said, do you want to become Santa? You want to keep on with the Santa thing? And he said yes. And we took a picture. I handed him the box with the suit in it. And that following year, when we had Santa Claus in this very room, he came. And he was a very imposing Santa Claus. He was tall, and he had a good, strong voice, and he was really great with the children. Also, he didn't do too bad with their parents. They seemed to wander over and get hugs and sit with him and do whatever, but I think he enjoyed it as much as I did. I got to finally sit here and watch Santa, which for all those years I didn't get to watch anything much. It was a nice part of my life. I enjoyed it. And so now we pretty well wrapped up the grandchildren, and I won't go in any particular order, but I'll go with the oldest first. Mary Faye and Dan had one son, Dan Jr. He married a young lady whose first name was Kayla, and they had two children, Evie and Reese. Evie was born before Dan Sr. died, and she loved the man to death. She would lay up on his chest, and he loved it, every minute of it. And they had a real bond, and it was wonderful, because Dan Sr. didn't last too long after she came. It was very nice. And then they had a son named Reese who came along. He was their second child. Chris and Vicky had two children, Christy and Michael. Christy was pretty quiet. She liked nice automobiles. And she married Jeremy Andrew, a nicer young man I've not yet to meet. They had two children, Shelby and Barrett. Shelby has got a foot taller in the last year. She's taller now than her mother. I think she's going to be as tall as her dad. And they're both very nice children. So we've been happy with that. And then we come to Michael. Michael is Michael. Michael had three sons. The first son was named Michael Christopher Winstead the third, because Michael was a junior. Chris was the original Michael Christopher, and I named Chris. Little did I know when that happened that there would be two more after him with the same name. So I kind of have a little bit of special regard for Michael Christopher, because the name's still around. And then Cole came to, along with, next to Christopher. He was about a year younger than Christopher. Nice young man, a little bit quieter, but nice. The Her third child came a few years later, and he was Clayton Lee Winstead, and Michael loves to call him Clayton Leroy. But anyway, Clayton he is a one-person terror. If you ever meet him, he's wild, he's into everything, he's all over everything, and he's just a boy, and I love him. And he came in here a couple months ago. He started going to kindergarten, and he wasn't Clayton anymore. He was quiet, he was nice, he played nice, he didn't scream or holler, and it was just like, well, there's another child here we didn't know about. Is it really him or not? Be anymore. Mallory has, and Jessica, they both have. Jessica has a young son who's, we won't say the spitting image because that would probably upset greatly his paternal grandparents. But we have a picture here of Kevin when he was a young man with blonde hair, and this young child of Jessica's. When you look at it, it could either be Kevin or it could be who he really is.
Marshall.
They look that much alike, Marshall. And Kevin is beside himself that Jessica had this child. He loves this child. He can't get enough of him. Mallory's he's got a daughter. He has a set of twins that are a couple years old, and just got married a little over a year ago, and he had a child with that young lady, and so he has 4 altogether. So altogether we're talking 11 great-grandchildren, and Granny and I are still here. She's 84 and I'm 85 in August. We're still hanging in here. We don't go as much as we used to, and but we're still here, and hopefully we have seen most of our family, which is something that my grandparents never heard tell of back in those days. I do remember I was 10 when my grandfather died, and I never met my mother's mother and father whatsoever. But it's nice to be able to see your grandchildren and your great-grandchildren and know that you were responsible for them to be here.
I guess I can tell you a few short stories. So one time, I went along with him. I was probably preteen, and we were going to pick up a new horse trailer that he had bought from some farmer. And we were coming out of the farm lane, and we looked off to the right in the field, and the horse trailer was passing us. We've talked about that for years. Another thing, a couple other things we did share together was we were probably the only two that were ever in a really bad car accident together. Coming home one snowy night from Easton, got into a really bad wreck. Not a good memory, but something we did together. And then we worked together doing electrical work for many years. So that's something that I'll probably never forget. I'm sure he won't either. He'd like to, but I'll never forget that. So.
The other sad things would be when your parents leave. You know they're going to leave you because that's life, but you never really know when. And I never got to say goodbye to either one of them. The last words my father ever said on this earth was my name. And he died at home in Pennsylvania, Christiana, Pennsylvania. He was laid in the bed for several months before he died. Died of leukemia, and he called my name. And nobody knew what he wanted. I knew what he wanted. Exactly. He didn't have to say it. I knew. My mother outlived him another 10 or 12 years. She lived almost to the century mark. She was in her 90s when she died. Dan was a person that came into our lives, married our daughter, gave us a bigger family, and was one of the nicest people that I've ever had the pleasure to meet. He would do anything for anybody. He never asked to be reimbursed. He never wanted anything back. He was just happy to be here and happy to help. And most of all, he loved to eat. And he showed that appreciation every time he got here because he knew Granny was going to have potatoes, one of his favorite all-time things, and he loved the mashed potatoes. And so we all loved Dan. And I went to see him numerous times at the hospital. And the one time I never forgot was he had two friends there visiting from work. And the nurse come by and said, I need to do something. I don't want to disturb your friends or something. And Dan spoke up and he said, that is, I guess I was there by myself that day. Dan said, that's my best friend. That's my father-in-law. I never knew how he felt. We had shotguns together and rode together and camped together and done a lot of things, but that's what he said. The hardest thing that I had to deal with, I guess, was to try to get through this was our oldest son. When he left his farm business that he established, we were so proud of him for that. And he bought several homes wanting to build a big building that he could have his own business, his own equipment in. And he finally got that home. And he finally got that building out here on River Road. And he had a heart attack maybe 10 years prior to that. We had gone to Easton and sit through that when that was going on. And he got through that and he went on and he had his business, and now he had built this building. He had a couple dump trucks, and he was in the business of truck driving. And he had another heart attack. We were going to eat with our youngest Mark, going toward Denton to a pizza place to eat that night. And I think we went all over there and we're actually eating when we got a phone call. Chris was in the hospital. Dropped everything and go to Easton, and he'd had another problem with his heart. So by the time we got there, we finally did get to see him, and he looked pretty good. And we thought, well, great. And they decided they were going to send him to Baltimore, shock trauma. And we'd already dealt with shock trauma, my wife and I, with Kevin when he hurt his leg, and it was not a place we wanted to go back to. The memories there are not good. But we went, and they took him up there for a whole week. They messed around. They were going to do a stent, they were going to do a bypass, they were going to do this, they were going to do that. Wound up letting him go home. He got as far as Annapolis. He had another spell. They took him to Annapolis. He had to sign in there, which went on forever. They decided, no, we're not going to do this. We'll go back to Baltimore. Well, when he got back there, he had to sign in again because he'd been discharged. They took him back in Baltimore. And then a day or two later, they did operate, and they did a bypass, I guess, as far as I remember. And Mark worked across the bridge all this time, and he said, you want to go with me tonight to see Chris? Well, we did, and we went up to this hospital and up the elevator that we'd used many times before, and we saw Chris, and he looked pretty good. He got through the operation, and he was feeling good. He was laughing, and we were happy at how things had turned out. And a couple of days later, Mark said, "You're going to go see Chris? He's coming home tomorrow, but we go up tonight if you want to go." And he took us again. Well, Chris was really in good shape this time. He was carrying on and showed his mother the scar, which was healing, and talked about coming home and how nice it would be to get out of the hospital. And we were just thrilled to death he got to it. And then somebody brought up the fact about cars, that all their cars were big cars and they were high and they were hard to get into, or else they were low and you had to really get down. And he was a big man and over 6 foot, and it would, either way it would be hard for him. We said, well, we got one that's kind of in the middle of both those, and we thought we'd offer it. And they said, okay, we'll come get your car to bring him home in. So Mary Faye was up here that day, and it was on a Saturday. We waited all morning long, and nobody came to get the car. By that time, we began to get the feeling that something had happened. And we would call, but they wouldn't answer, or they wouldn't talk, or they wouldn't tell you anything. And finally, when it started to get dark, this was really getting ridiculous, because the whole day had gone by and we had heard nothing. And my wife called up Jeremy, and he said they were on their way home and he thought they had stopped to eat. So another half hour or so, and the door, we heard the car come in the driveway, the door opened. Each one of them come in the house. They were all together. Each one of them were crying, tears in their eyes, carrying on, sobbing. We knew then. And when I went to bed that night, I said, God, take me, because I'm no use to nobody. Let him come home. It's one of the very few times in my life that I've ever said a prayer that I didn't get a direct answer. When we left the hospital, the night that we last saw him, his last words were, I'll see you tomorrow. I didn't get to touch him. I should have. His mother did. I thought, well, I'll see him tomorrow. She's out here in Ridgely with my father and mother, 3 people that I love. And then just this past July, the 11th, is my youngest grandson's birthday. Jacob Christopher Winstead, Mark's youngest son. I called him up, or I texted him. I don't know if he was home then or not. He's been away for a month. He may have been home. But anyway, telling him happy birthday and hope he had a great day, and that we were all happy for him. He was now 21 years old. He was a man, and wishing him the best. So I was an hour or so after I talked to Jacob and wished him the best. I got a phone call from Pennsylvania, and my wife seems to think it was a Claire Marie. I'm cloudy on who called, because Linda had 5 daughters, and Claire Marie I never heard much from. She was the second oldest of Linda's second marriage, and to tell me that her mother had passed away. Linda, my baby sister, who was 7 years younger than myself. I remember the first time I ever laid eyes on her. She was laying in my mother's arms on Maple Avenue in Ridgely. She was born at home, and all I could see was a black mop of hair. And they said, you have a baby sister. And she often told me going through life that she thought I must have been a saint, because that's all Mom ever talked about was Mallory this and Mallory that. And she never understood why they've always, but there was a 7-year difference in time. She was 10, I was going to the service, and had more or less left home for good. I was back a couple months before we got married, but I never was around her much. Rebecca, I was around most of my life. We spent a lot of time together just those few years made a big difference. And we went out on dates together and had people come to the house, and we were a lot closer back then. A few days later, Linda was cremated. I wanted to go and see her at the funeral home just to say goodbye. I guess if I had called them direct, I might have got a chance, but when you deal through someone else and they don't know how you feel and what it means to you or whatever, lots of times those things don't get done. I never got the chance to tell her goodbye, so I asked Jamie if she told me she was going to the hospital, to see her mother for the last time. I said, please tell her goodbye for me. One year I got involved in being in the committee, and my wife came along. She was also in it because she helped do everything. And they had people talk at the committee, and a lot of my teachers were there, and they would ask you what happened. And I said, my comment was that the best thing that I had ever done in my entire life was marry Mary Lou Gibson. And I still feel the same way, and I'm sorry that I sometimes get out of sorts, especially I guess we're getting older. But anyway, at 85, I would like to tell future generations of this family how proud I am that you have my father's name, because he was the man that I looked up to most all of my life and loved him more than any human being. So I think his legacy has passed down through me to you, and don't ever abuse the name if you can help it, because he was one of the nicest persons that I've ever known. He had a beautiful voice. He could sing better than most people. Sang everywhere when he was younger, choirs and minstrels and funerals and weddings. And if you had known him and heard him, you would never forget him. And another great talent he had was swimming. He brought many people in out of the Atlantic Ocean, saved their lives. Got no credit, but he went out and brought them in. We've seen this happen. My wife and I both watched this happen on occasion. He'd go to the beach and stay there all day long by a bag of peanuts, but that was my dad. And I loved him so much. My mother was great, but I was always thought that much of him, and I would like for the name to carry on, and I'm happy that some other children have decided to name their children with the MW name, which all of our children were named MWs. When we had a child, we all had the same first and last initial. All 6 of us had that initial, and there are several still around today with that. And I wish you the best in life that you can get, and whatever happiness you have, I wish you happiness. And someday, if you ever see this, well, you'll know there's an old man sitting there before you came along, and what he went through and what he did, and he was just happy at this age to be able to get up and get out of bed. So God bless you, and have a great, great life. Thank you.
Dad, I love you. You have a very special place in my heart. You always have. You are my hero.
Granddad, it's been an honor to be your number one for 40-some years.
Here's my message, and you'll understand it. I love you, and I got $1. And that's my message.
So I guess my message to him really can't be just to him, because it would have to be to both of my parents. They, the best parents anybody could ever ask for. I love you both.
I just appreciate everything that you've done for us and the kids, and the time that you picked them up from school and spending time with them, and making their belts, making them feel special, and I appreciate it.
And so my message to Granddad is that we love you, and boogie, 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 boogie on down to Brown Street.
At the end of The Dark Knight Rises, Batman tells Commissioner Gordon that anyone can be a hero. And that is absolutely true. Grandad, I want you to know that this movie is for you just as much as it is for everyone else. I love you, and you are my hero.
I love you, Grandad. I know I ain't been the best in my life. I know I really messed up. But hopefully today's time I'm trying to change and try to make the Winstead name proud again. I know. Look at Dad, Uncle Chris, you, Uncle Mark. I'm trying to change that so I can be a proud Winstead. Everybody is here because of you. I love you. See you on another note.
Well, by God, Bull Butter, we'll see you on Christmas, Santa.
I hope you still follow your poetry up. I know you had a lot back when I was younger, and I know we sat down and we did What Would You Do with the Old School Bus, and most recently you texted me about that one. I remember seeing the ones on your wall and the calligraphy about your mom and your dad, and honestly I hope you do a few more, and I hope you never lose that and always carry that with you. I think that was a big part of what I remember, and I know you got some more words in there, maybe about some old barns from what I hear and see of you lately. So
Thank you for everything you've done for me. Love you, Grandad.
Grandad, I just want to let you know that I'm really thankful for everything that you've been able to do for the whole family. For me, personally, I want to let you know that I have every intention of continuing on the legacy.
In regard to my father-in-law, Mallory B. Winstead, I'd like to thank you for always taking care of, looking after, and sharing your scrapple with the Turk during the first early years of his life. I'd like to thank you for showing up for every project that we've encountered over the years. You were always right there to help get it done. Thank you for that. We've made lots of memories, and I've learned many things. But the thing that stands out the most is that you would do absolutely anything that you could to help your family. And for that we're thankful. and keep shining. We love you.
Okay, Valerie, here I am. Been married to you for many, many years, had many, many steps away and together and so forth and so on, but all together it's been pretty good. So take care of yourself, and I will too.